Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. The billionaire AI crusade is not just a policy problem. It is a moral one. A slow-motion coup against democratic self-government disguised as innovation. A small cadre of billionaires, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Mark Andreessen, Sam Altman, and a chorus of imitators, are racing to build and deploy artificial intelligence on a huge scale while treating democratic oversight as an insult and regulation as a calamity. They are not stumbling into a regulatory vacuum. They are engineering it. In any minimally healthy democracy, powerful technologies that affect everyone, nuclear power, pharmaceuticals, aviation, financial systems, are subject to public rules and overseen by institutions that answer, however imperfectly, to voters and laws. The new oligarchs want to flip that script. Their story goes like this. The real threat is not unaccountable private power. The real threat is government strong enough to say no. Peter Thiel is the purest version of this. He has argued that a state powerful enough to stop something like AI will tend toward a global totalitarian character, explicitly warning that state capacity to regulate AI is a step toward global dictatorship. In that framing, the moment a democratic government asserts the right to slow or shape AI, it slides toward tyranny, while billionaire unilateralism is recast as freedom. Think about what that implies. If the public, through its institutions, insults on rules for a planet-shaping technology, that is framed as flirting with authoritarianism. But if a billionaire insists on building and deploying that same technology however he sees fit, that's presented as dynamism and progress. This is not an accidental nuance. It is a deliberate ideological project to delegitimize the only structure the public has to protect itself, coming from a man who has backed surveillance-oriented firms and hard-right political causes while claiming to fear state overreach. Mark Andreessen takes this logic and gives it a manifesto. In his techno-optimist manifesto, he calls attempts to slow or regulate AI a form of murder, arguing that any deceleration will cause preventable deaths by blocking life-saving innovations down the line. Regulation equals homicide. Caution equals killing the future. He even compiles a list of enemies: tech ethics, risk management, sustainability, the precautionary principle. Basic concepts that say maybe don't run an uncontrolled experiment on the entire species. It is telling these become villains standing between humanity and salvation through accelerated technology. The moral inversion here is breathtaking. Demands for fairness, transparency, and basic safety are cast as anti-human, while pushing untested systems into schools, workplaces, media ecosystems, and public infrastructure becomes the height of compassion because somewhere, someday, a future AI might cure a disease or optimize an economy. Notice the sleight of hand. Present concrete harms, discrimination baked into models, mass job displacement, supercharged disinformation, automated surveillance, are waved away as trivial compared to hypothetical future benefits that by sheer coincidence justify whatever the current crop of founders want to do. The message is simple. They are the protagonists of history. Regulation is murder, ethics is the enemy, and everyone else's role is to clap from the sidelines while the adults build the future. If Thiel provides the anti-state theology and Andreessen writes the gospel of acceleration, Elon Musk is its evangelist, the performer, the chaos engine making the ideology go viral. Musk has spent years warning about the dangers of artificial general intelligence, invoking apocalyptic metaphors and summoning the demon, even as he races into the very domain he claims to fear. He launches XAI, pushes out models like Grok, and integrates AI into his broader empires of cars, rockets, satellites, and a platform formerly known as Twitter. When critics point out the harms, Grok output echoing extremist narratives, anti-Semitic tropes surfacing in responses, or the model being deployed with flimsy guardrails, the response is not to embrace serious oversight. The response is to wage war on what Musk calls woke AI, reframing efforts to moderate content or impose standards as ideological censorship. Under this logic, building guardrails for AI is authoritarian, but letting one man's whims shape a global information architecture is somehow the pinnacle of free speech. Even when Musk nods toward regulation, attending high-profile AI meetings, flirting with support for evaluation rules, the broader project is to delegitimize independent public authority over AI while normalizing his own de facto governance of critical infrastructure and discourse. The result is privatized rule. He decides what is amplified, how AI responds to political or cultural queries, how moderation standards shift, and increasingly how governments interact with his infrastructure. These are political decisions made by someone who never took an oath of office and can change course on a whim, with no ethics review, no public hearings, and no enforceable accountability. Sam Altman, by contrast, is the soft-spoken face of what passes for the responsible wing of AI acceleration. OpenAI was born as a nonprofit promising openness, global stewardship, and a mission to ensure that AI would benefit all of humanity. Over time, it transformed into a capped profit structure tightly entangled with Microsoft, relying on proprietary models and keeping crucial details about training data, safety processes, and risks behind a corporate veil. Altman now tours legislatures and conferences saying he welcomes regulation and urging governments to take AI risks seriously, sometimes explicitly criticizing existing government approaches as clumsy or inadequate. But listen closely. He warns against overregulation that might have huge negative consequences and tends to support frameworks that can be met more easily by large, well-capitalized incumbents than by smaller labs or open-source projects. This is how regulatory capture sounds in the age of AI. A company presents itself as the adult in the room, begs to be regulated, and then helps draft laws that keep it on top of the food chain. The risk is that the public ends up with regulations that look tough on paper, but mostly cement the dominance of existing players and leave core questions of transparency, accountability, and democratic control unresolved. The public is told, don't worry, the industry wants rules too. The fine print says the same firms that profit from these systems will help design the rules, interpret them, and decide how much the public gets to know about the systems being woven into schools, workplaces, and government. Step back and the constellation comes into focus. Peter Thiel explicitly fears a government strong enough to regulate AI and dresses that fear up as a defense of liberty. Mark Andreessen brands regulation and ethics as murder and positions unrestrained AI development as a moral imperative. Elon Musk uses culture war rhetoric to delegitimize safety and oversight while building a sprawling empire that sits at the choke points of modern communication and computation. Sam Altman tells lawmakers he welcomes rules, but follows a playbook that looks a lot like preemptive capture of the policymaking process. This is not a random scatter of personalities. It is a coherent political project. At its core, that project aims to equate regulation with tyranny and market power with virtue, so that when the state acts as its suspect, but when a billionaire acts, it is innovation. It seeks to redefine ethics and precaution as enemies of humanity, so that any attempt to impose guardrails can be smeared as complicit in future deaths. And it quietly shifts the real seat of power from elected institutions to private platforms and labs, as AI systems are embedded in public procurement, law enforcement, welfare screening, and political messaging. The problem is not just that the wrong people are making the rules. It is that a handful of unaccountable actors are trying to make the rules unwritable, to lock in a worldview where the future is something they own, not something we negotiate together. A serious democratic response has to be both policy-focused and moral. On the policy side, powerful AI systems need binding transparency and safety obligations, with independent audits and real enforcement, not self-reporting by vendors who have every incentive to downplay risk. Conflict of interest and lobbying disclosure rules must be aggressive enough that the Thiels, Musks, Andreessens, and Altmans of the world cannot quietly write the rules that govern them or launder their preferences through think tanks and front groups. Competition and open research must be protected so that regulation does not become a cartel-making device for incumbents. But policy without a moral backbone will buckle. Societies have to reject the idea that slowing down to protect workers, elections, marginalized communities, and human agency is murder, while letting a handful of men experiment on billions in real time is progress. The central question is not whether AI can be powerful. It is who that power serves, who bears the risk, and who is allowed to say no. The billionaire AI vanguard is betting that the public will be too dazzled, divided, or exhausted to resist their narrative that they alone are qualified to steer the future. The task of democratic politics is to prove them wrong, not by banning innovation, but by refusing to surrender the most basic principle of self-government, that the rules for civilization are written by the many, not imposed by the few. Let's keep an eye on this. It's a major issue. It's one Donald Trump seems to be very enamored by. And most important, it affects our future in ways that we cannot today anticipate. So let's guard our future. Let's guard our children, our grandchildren, and our posterity. This has been America's Fractured Politics. Thank you.